All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Fit Podcast. Hope you guys are having a good evening. Before we start, please like, subscribe, and follow the Instagram channel. We've changed the whole heading name. It's actually AK Fit Physio. It's actually my business name, but I still post a lot of content on the YouTube channel, on the Instagram page. So give us a subscribe, follow and like and comment anything below it, any topics you want us to talk about. We really appreciate it. So tonight's
Mhm.
topic is very big common motto that we hear. If you don't use it, you will lose it. A lot of people feel like if they do not exercise when they're injured or do a certain movement patterns because they're healing from an injury or surgery, or even if they stop a movement because it's been kind of nagging them or causing a lot of issues with it, they'll never be able to get back to doing that movement, or they'll never be able to get back to being as strong as they were, or they'll lose all their muscle, or they'll lose all their progress they made in the gym. So we're going to kind of divulge into that, kind of talk to you guys about why that's not the case, why that sometimes is the case in certain situations, kind of dive into that more. So, Yusuf, my boy, what is the first thought that pops into your head when you hear the term, if I feel like a client comes up to you, they're like, if I don't use it, I'm gonna lose it. What do you kind of say to that person?
Man, the way that I approach this, I guess, topic is really about the idea of movement. The first kind of I guess piece that I can add to this would be about ranges of motion and talking about exercise for one aspect. I've heard a lot of, and I've seen it a lot of times with the clients that I train, say people over the age of 50, 55, the people who are more sedentary, the people that don't really do a whole lot of exercise as much as they did when they were younger, in the context of they lose certain ranges of motions and abilities if they don't do those abilities. For example, I read somewhere some article about people over the age of 30, they they stop sprinting. Uh, I'm not sure exactly the context, but what I would say is that if you're getting older, there's less of a reason to be running full speed. Unless people have a specific reason to sprint, whether it's for a sport or for activity, they're just not doing that activity anymore. So they're losing the skill of sprinting. And I do agree to some extent. I do agree that based off of our modern society, our modern life, the average person, the average American that we see doesn't sprint. They're not being chased by a tiger like we did when we were in Neanderthal times. But because they live in a modern technology, society, there's no need to be sprinting anymore. So they just don't. And then I have clients that all of a sudden they want to hop into a half marathon or even a marathon. For example, there's literally a client that I trained that just, talked to me about that. And I have to start them off with a little bit more of a context of like, hey, you haven't sprinted, you haven't ran full speed literally in 15, 20 years. And what makes you think that all of a sudden you can get back right into it, right? So I do believe that there is some truth to the if you don't use it, you will lose it. You can lose the affinity for it if you don't practice that motion, if you aren't sprinting regularly, or even at the very least, the once a week or once every couple of weeks, you just don't sprint. However, you still have the ability to build that skill back up. And as a coach, as a trainer, my goal with this client, for example, is literally to build up her skill to be able to withstand more tolerance for sprinting. We need
Mhm.
to build much more strength stability in her hips, her knees, her ankles, her feet. There's so many exercises that we're doing now regularly to help improve that skill acquisition. So it's going to take some time, but there is a way out. That's where my mind really clings toward is through movement. And I'm so curious what your mindset is about that phrase. If you don't use it, you will lose it.
I think um, there's a couple different perspectives. From the PT perspective, I don't necessarily, it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily always, it's not always the case with injuries. If you don't use it, you will lose it. It's kind of almost like um, the opposite sometimes. Like if you lose, if you use it, you may lose it. Meaning, like if you use this muscle, you do this specific movement pattern, you may lose the ability to be able to do that again for a specific time being. just because you could tweak something or you could re-injure something, or your muscles, tendons, ligaments, and joints just don't have the ability to, maintain that full eccentric, concentric contraction under a specific time or load capacity or work capacity, wherever it may be. So there's that opinion. I don't know how that necessarily pertains to PT as a physical therapist as much. That's the one thing that when we kind of came up with this topic, because it's very a common theme that you hear a lot, I kind of thought about it. I was like, I guess it can pertain when you think about more sports athletes, but if you're talking about the everyday client who comes into the clinic and is just injured, ankle sprain, the last thing, for the most part, they're worried about is like if they don't use it, they're gonna lose it. They're not worried about their ankle musculature, Um, I would say more for the sports clientele that would kind of come into play. Um, and I would think that is definitely something that if I was in that type of setting, I would address to those clients. Um, but for clients that I work with, powerlifters, for example, bodybuilders, even like how quickly the thing about if you don't lose it, if you don't use it, you will lose it. How quickly you lose muscle largely depends on exactly how little you're doing physical activity.
Right.
So like scientific evidence tells that if you don't do any physical activity at all, unfortunately you can like lose a lot of muscle pretty quickly. I think there was actually I might not be quoting the date of the research study, but I know from school we learned that there was basically a study where basically these subjects were bedridden for like a whole week, and they basically did biopsies of their muscle mass in their quads, for example. That's like the first muscle when you're bedridden to get rid of is your VMO, your
Right.
vas medialis. It's the first muscle that's going to go. That's scientifically proven. That's a common fact. So they basically did biopsies of other muscles as well too, not just that muscle, your quad, hamstring, biceps, of how quickly your muscles you would actually lose muscle mass if you were bedridden. Didn't do anything, laid in bed all day for a week straight. And they actually found significant loss of muscle mass and muscle development, muscle tissue, um, and obviously the patient's range of motion, all that stuff contractures came onto play. So I'm not going to get too into that, but that's like the really severe case with this that I tend to think people's mindset goes to is like, holy crap, that's what I'm going to end up like. I was like, listen, man, like those people who are bedridden have a lot of core morbidities that are going on, a lot of other cardiovascular, endocrine, metabolic things that are going on that are really causing them to be bedridden for a week time. So, in real life, not just the research study.
Right.
But I will say there was also, I do know, recently I read that there was a research study done. Basically a research study. They took 20 subjects with at least like 1 year of training experience, I believe it was, and they had them stop lifting for 2 weeks. And they had lifted for at least 5 to 6 days a week prior, consistently for over a year or two period of time. But they still did their daily activities, work, walking to and from the car, whatever it may be. But no like bed rest, not complete bed rest or anything like that. And what they found was that there was no significant drop off in muscle mass after 2 weeks of detraining. Now, that's not to say the results did show that that's not to say after 2 weeks there couldn't be a significant drop off, or there may not be another drop off for another week, for 3 weeks, or a month, or 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I didn't find much research study about how long it takes for you to actually lose muscle mass. But that research study in its own kind of tells you like if you're still actively moving, which a lot of people and clients of ours, sports injuries, athletes, even the everyday person, if you're still moving, and trying to, if you need physical therapy, go into physical therapy, moving, do all that, you're not you're not bedridden. You're not losing everything. you're just trying to rebuild everything is the term, I guess, what you're trying is what I'm trying to come up with is like you're not losing everything. It's more of like you're rebuilding everything. When you get injured, you can't, yes, it's going to take maybe a while to come back, but it doesn't mean that you can't rebuild all all of what you've lost. That doesn't mean that your muscles are going to shrink. They may shrink in hypertrophy in terms of size. That's a very common thing. But in terms of overall relative strength, the strength doesn't necessarily decrease.
Right.
What decreases is the muscle's ability to perform with higher reps, higher volume, overall endurance of the muscles is what decreases. The ability for it to kind of maintain loads under specific tensions, the work capacity of it, everything that's what decreases. Not necessarily the strength so much per se, but the work output, how much you can do in a session. If you take 2 weeks off from training and then you come back in and try to do the same thing, you're probably not going to be able to, or even you may be able to, but the next day you're going to feel DOMS, that delayed onset muscle soreness. So in my opinion, I just went on for a little ramble there, but I try to break it down from my perspective as a PT and as like as a strength coach, personal trainer, and powerlifting coach, and as a powerlifter, of just like, listen, this is kind of my mindset. It sucks when it happens when you get injured or you have something go on that derails you from being able to do what you normally do with training or whatever active movements it may be. It could even be walking. It could be swimming, it could be golfing you know, so those are all things that everyday people do that they want to try to get back to doing, and they might not be able to do it at the same rate that they were prior. So it's not necessarily if you don't, use it, you will lose it. It's just if you don't use it, you will just have to rebuild it, is all. That's I guess that's a good acronym. I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, do you feel like, you know, I guess you feel like with your clients, sometimes their mindsets can be if they've had injuries in the past and it's taken longer, they recovered from an injury, this one injury that happened, and then now they have a new one or a new ache or pain, and they're all worried about, regressing in their, exercises and all the progress that I've made is going to go to the crapper, I'm going to lose it all. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I literally just tell them that they're being so hard on themselves. I think people, just as you said, you put good context around that, Andrew, about people get inside their heads. Really, people start comparing themselves to where they were before. They think about before I got injured, before I got old and decrepit, that they're comparing their now to that where they who they were 20, 30 years ago. And it's just so unfair. It's a very defeatist mentality to have, and it just doesn't really get you anywhere, right? I'm a big believer in thinking about where you're at. Think about where you're at. Think about your abilities. Don't think about the things you can't do. Think about the things that you can do and you are doing right now. I really really emphasize this ability to do and perform your daily activities, and then be able to strengthen those in the gym. Thinking about all the things that people do at work. Think about, say for example, I train a few blue collar individuals, and they whether they load trucks, whether they're in construction, for example, these guys are constantly moving their bodies. But if they have a pain, for example, in their low back or like their hip, we're gonna have to train those specific muscles in a smart way in the gym. Or, for example, I train several like men and women, like dads and moms, average everyday people, and they're so concerned about, oh man, I've been so good this month. Oh my God, I just started off the new year with a new goal of losing all this weight, and they get inside their heads and they start catastrophizing about, I'm gonna take 3 or 4 weeks off from the gym. I don't know if I can do this. Or if I'm traveling, for example, they don't have access to a gym. I like to put it into context of, you are a human being. You have muscles. You are not going to all of a sudden shrink your muscles down to the size of a pea, and you can't walk up a flight of stairs. You can't walk on 2 feet and walk a couple miles a day. It's just by simply moving your body. And I know not everybody is in that study, for example, when you were completely bedridden, which who is doing that, right? Out of anyone that we're training, who is completely bedridden, right? They're still moving, they're still carrying things, whether it be a simple backpack they put on their back and they're walking with load, right? There's things that we're doing with our muscles. We're constantly using our muscles. Even when we're sitting down, we're using some muscles, right? So to put into context and really tell people, hey, it's totally fine. You're a human being. The same way it took some time to build up when you first started working out, it's going to take some time to rebuild and get back to where you were. And it's crazy because what you mentioned before about that study, I love that study. And I also love to bring up another study that came up about this too. I point to this one quite a bit, and it's going to happen to even me when I will be taking a hiatus from the gym for a little bit for the month of fasting. We talk about the minimum effective dose. I talk a lot about with my clients the minimum effective dose of being able to maintain your gains, right? You know all the perfect things that have to happen. Your sleep needs to be in check. You got to eat all this damn protein. You got to make sure you hit the gym, do all these movements. And people get like, "Oh, snap, I'm going to be out of town for this couple weeks. How can I keep my muscle that I just built?" It's
Hmm.
remarkable how little of actual weight and load and volume you need to maintain your muscle. It is remarkable. When I learned that it takes just about a third of your work volume, a third of the reps, a third of the sets, just to maintain your muscle. It takes much longer to build strength and to build hypertrophy, build muscle size. But in order just to maintain, it doesn't require as much. So
Nope.
I like to put into perspective with most of my average clients is that it's not the end of the world. You are still moving your body. If you're able to walk on two legs, you are still carrying things, you're still doing groceries, you're still walking, you're still carrying things, and you're still sending a signal that, hey, I'm moving my body. Those people will bounce right back when they get back to their normal routine, when they get back to the gym, when they get back to their sleep routine, everything is good as normal, right? We may have to regress on some movements and make sure that they're not getting hurt or doing too much too quick. But they're still walking, they're still living, breathing. They're not going to die. They're not going to lose all their muscle overnight. And it's just so good to put them into perspective that it's going to be okay. This whole thing is a long journey. There's so much more to accomplish, and there's always more to do. So it's good to put into context about that.
I think that's a great way to put it because I think a lot of times people do struggle with I get it asked a lot at work when I treat patients. I'm trying not to go off too much tangent with them. And then I was like, well, if you really want more advice, you can just, I'll coach you. There you go. Then you can have all my expertise and knowledge that you want. But I try not to get too much into detail with people about that because sometimes I feel like sometimes when you give them more info and don't just break it down simplistically, like, listen, this is exactly what's going on. This is what's going to happen. You're not going to lose your muscle mass. Your muscle endurance might decrease, but you're like you said, the term of like your muscle's going to shrink to a P. That's not going to happen. Now, I sometimes do offer clients is like, hey, if you want to read this research study here's more information for you to have at your disposal if you really feel like you want to know more about it and kind of understand because some people's anxiety gets really high. They work really hard, an injury happens, and all they feel like they've lost everything. I've been there, you've been there, so like that's a very common thing for not just athletes powerlifters, bodybuilders, runners. It's everyday people as well who their goal of the day is to be able to, you know, get in and out of the bed pain free or be able to, pick up their grandkid, so things like that, something happens now they feel like they've been so good and now they're having this pain again, in their shoulder or whatever. So, but I did want to mention one more point. I did, I did actually I had the research article actually saved in a doc from PT school. So I actually pulled it up, and this is what I wanted to read to you guys because I told you guys in the research study it did 2 weeks, and then they said 3 weeks. The research study actually said that there could be significant um, muscle mass loss, but other more research needed to be done. There was more research done, and basically what it said was that the 3 weeks time frame made an appearance in another article. Basically, what it found was that they had 7 participants. They did 6 weeks of resistance training and 3 weeks of detraining. And then they did actual MRI to measure the muscle mass size of the pec major and triceps muscles. So the pec, chest muscles, and triceps muscles to tell if muscle loss actually happened over those 3 weeks or if it was just more of a hard drop off after, 2 weeks. And what they found was that there wasn't much evidence of that per the MRI. And they thought that maybe the decrease in muscle mass, if it did happen, could be more to um, just overall total body water and glycogen levels being decreased. And when you don't do resistance training, and when you do, those obviously increase with resistance training. But like I said, even with that article, they do still state there's a lot of skepticism with the glycogen hypothesis. So there's always more research needed to be done, but I did want to give our viewers that that information because that was on my mind throughout the rest since we've been talking, and I did find that, so I wanted to tell that. But so the point with that being, Yusuf, is like these are extreme cases,
Yeah.
and the point being, this is not doing any resistance training whatsoever. These participants in these studies did. When you get an injury, you're going to be doing some sort of resistance training. It might be really dialed back to, just doing quad sets or shorter quads where you literally have a pillow underneath your knee and you're just activating, trying to get some quad activation. It may just be, for the shoulder, doing some towel slides on a flat surface against, without having to go up against gravity. It may be, if it's a low back, it may just be doing simple like pelvic tilts and squeezing your tummy muscles to get some core activation and trying to flatten out our low back to not have our low back activate as much when we are having to squat down and do functional. So it's like you might be working around that injury area. So it might not, because we don't maybe won't want to activate those muscles and strengthen them right now. But we are doing resistance training in other areas,
Yeah.
just to a lesser degree. And so it's not, like I said, you're not going to be better and you're not going to be out for 3 weeks doing
Yeah.
absolutely nothing. You can be if you want to. That can definitely be your choice. But again, that's the likely the saying of if you don't lose it, you're going to lose it. I would say, and I think Yusuf would agree with me, in some instances, it can be true if you're bedridden, if a serious injury happens and some people get in the dumps, man, and they don't do anything for a week or two, nothing at all. That will help. That will hurdle you and put you into that, you know, starting to lose some muscle mass. It will happen. Detraining will happen. But and the other camp, the other side of that spectrum is, you're not going to lose everything if you have an injury. You're still going to be moving. You're still going to trying to get better. We hope. And if you do have questions about anything, if you are injured and listening to this podcast and you have no idea what to do next, comment, message me or Yusuf. We'd be glad to help you, and kind of get you on the right track, of everything. So, Yusuf, what do you feel about that? I guess my last question to you tonight would be, you know, um, how do you handle clients who they may have an injury history? What do you do? What do you tell them at the beginning of your training before you do anything? Because they might be like, I don't want to get injured doing this. They might be worried about that because then, they've had an injury and then they lost all their progress and all that stuff. And they're gonna like, if I don't use it, if I don't use it, I'm gonna lose it. Well, what do you kind of say to them? How do you kind of build that rapport with them and have that trust, have them trust you, see whether they realize, like, listen, this is not going to happen. We have a plan in place. Like, what do you say to them in that instance?
Yeah. I mean, really, what I kind of just get rid of all of their apprehensions by simply regressing exercises. To be completely honest, what I do is I think about the things that they can do. So, say for example, their PT, for example, you tell them, hey, you're not allowed to deadlift anything over 30 pounds, for example. And people are like, what? Are you kidding me? I'm going to lose all this muscle. Are you kidding me? I can't lift up more than 30 pounds. there's there's literally an almost damn near infinite amount of regressions and progressions for exercises. The fact that you're doing simple movement, like the basis of my training with my clients comes down to all the functional fundamental movements. You
Mhm.
can sneak the vegetables in the spaghetti, as I say, by giving people a single leg toe touch, by having a simple hand just to stabilize. You can have a hand on a freaking dumbbell rack and simply reach for your toe. You
Mhm.
are doing the same hinge motion as you would be if you were to be doing your 30-pound deadlift, for example. There's always a way, and there's so much value. I really believe in this. There's so much value in periodically regressing exercises because of the novelty aspect of what it does for adaptation for our clients. It's awesome. It's awesome to push numbers and constantly doing our deadlifts and doing our hack squats and our lunges and stuff. But I think what we sometimes we get caught up in our tunnel vision and we start saying, hey, it's cool that you're doing 300 pounds on leg press. Whoop-de-doo, awesome. But are you still able to grab the Legos that your kid dropped in the living room? Can we balance on one leg for 30 seconds? Can we do simple things that we probably don't even think about as moms, dads, you know, parents, people that are just we train, for example.
Hmm.
I really like to reduce all their anxieties by simply keeping up with those same motions. We're just not loading it as heavy as we would be if we were pushing the numbers. So that's how we kind of sneak in the vegetables and the spaghetti, so to speak, in order to so that we don't feel like we're losing muscle. We're still going to be sweating, we're still training, but we're not losing muscle because we keep up with those movements, just regress.
That's a really good point. Yusuf's got all the good acronyms and everything, man. Um, he's got all those good ones. I think that's a great point. And I think that, like I said, when I deal with my clients, I try to just break it down for them, as simple as possible. Try not to overwhelm them with too much information. I know both of us have a lot of knowledge and information, and I do feel like sometimes, even there's so many coaches out there who give so much information. I definitely still do this. I'm still trying to learn because it's just easy to us. But some people get overwhelmed and they get more anxious about,
Yeah.
if I get injured or if I have this injury, how am I going to recover? I'm going to lose everything. So, I tend to just break it down, keep it simplistic with clients, and then offer them resources if they really want more information about how, like, you're not going to lose muscle mass if you're injured for a short period of time. Um, so, and with that, guys, I think with everything that we talked about tonight, I think that really kind of allows us to build upon just exactly what happens when you do get injured. I think we're going to talk about that possibly in our next episode. So I do want to thank Yusuf for coming on tonight. And Yusuf, anything else before we wrap it up?
You're not gonna lose it. It's totally fine. Not the end of the world. We're good.
You're not gonna lose it, guys. You're only gonna rebuild it. Think about that term in your head, all right? Other than that, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, follow us on Instagram. And other than that, have a great Wednesday night, you guys. Take care.
Peace.